You really shouldn't have come, Margaret, Romy whispered loud enough for a few nearby guests to hear. And the words cut sharper than any knife could, though no one else seemed to notice. Margaret Thompson paused at the entrance of the grand ballroom, her hands clutching the edge of her clutch bag as her blue eyes swept across the polished oak floors, reflecting the warm glow of the chandeliers above. The soft hum of conversation and clinking glasses created a distant backdrop, almost muffled by the sudden thrum in her chest. Guests milled around in their elegant gowns and suits, unaware of the tension building silently at the corner table where she now stood. Her silver hair, carefully styled that afternoon, caught the light as she straightened her posture, every muscle tensed yet controlled. She took a slow, deliberate step forward, her heels making a quiet tap on the marble floor, and the whisper repeated itself in her mind, leaving a chill behind. The floral arrangements, arranged in tall crystal vases, seemed too large, too elaborate, as if mocking the simplicity and warmth she had always tried to bring to family gatherings. She observed Wade, her son, laughing politely with distant relatives, his expression cordial but empty, eyes avoiding hers entirely, as if trying not to be pulled into the web of tension that Romy had spun. Margaret's gaze lingered on Romy Carter, her daughter-in-law, whose polished blonde hair shone under the lights and whose smile, perfectly poised, didn't reach the calculating eyes behind it. She noted the slight arch of Romy's eyebrow, the subtle tilt of her head, the way she adjusted her necklace, all seemingly innocuous gestures yet brimming with an undercurrent of contempt. Margaret felt the weight of the room settle around her, the faint scent of roses and white lilies mingling with perfume and cologne, creating a cloud of elegance that contrasted sharply with the cold edge of Romy's words. She moved past the foyer toward her assigned seat, each step measured, silent yet purposeful, and the soft rustle of her navy blue gown brushing against the polished floor seemed to mark the rhythm of her awareness sharpening. A waiter passed, offering glasses of champagne, and Margaret's hand briefly hovered over the delicate stem of her flute, feeling the cool glass, grounding herself. Her mind replayed the moments leading to this evening, the invitations sent, the careful selection of her dress, the small note she had written to the family, all intended to show love and inclusion. And now, standing amid laughter and toasts, she felt an unfamiliar sensation, a mingling of disbelief and silent indignation, as she realized that the casual cruelty of a few words could unravel the careful mosaic of her expectations. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her breathing steady, and yet inside, a storm gathered. She noticed the way Romy shifted slightly in her seat, nodding to a cousin as though nothing had happened, the casual demeanor almost theatrical, a contrast to the subtle quake of tension that Margaret could feel like a pulse in the air. Margaret allowed herself a moment to survey the crowd from this vantage point, noting the subtle alliances forming, the whispers behind hands, the polite laughter that carried none of the warmth she remembered from previous family celebrations. Every detail became a piece of evidence, every gesture a clue to the undercurrent of manipulation that had led to this moment. She could hear the soft echo of Romy's statement replaying in her mind, each repetition sharpening the edges of her resolve. Margaret's fingers, resting lightly on the folded napkin in front of her, flexed imperceptibly, a private acknowledgement that she would navigate this minefield of decorum and betrayal with the same quiet precision that had guided her through decades of family intricacies. Outside the ballroom, the twilight sky began to darken, casting long shadows across the hotel's manicured gardens, and through the large windows, the glimmer of the city lights seemed to mirror the complexity of Margaret's internal landscape. She remained seated, a composed figure amidst the swirling currents of familial politeness and hidden tension, her mind cataloging each infraction, each slight, each nuance of Romy's calculated behavior. In that instant, Margaret Thompson understood that this was not merely a social misstep, not a casual insult. It was a deliberate assertion of dominance and disregard, a microcosm of the many ways she had been edged out of her family's center. And though she did not respond aloud, the slight lift of her chin, the steady calm in her posture, the silent observation of every interaction around her, all spoke volumes to the inner strength she harbored and the patience she would need to reclaim her place without ever lowering herself to the level of confrontation. The crystal glasses reflected the light like tiny prisms, the murmurs of the guests drifting past her like distant waves, and Margaret felt a clarity settle over her. A recognition that power in this room was not determined by who spoke loudest but by who remained composed, attentive, and unshaken. As she adjusted her posture, allowing a gentle exhale to release tension she had not realized she was holding, Margaret understood that the night had only just begun and that every observation, every silent note she took of Romy's movements, would contribute to a reckoning measured in subtlety, grace, and unyielding composure, a quiet testament to her awareness that she would not be diminished, ignored, or underestimated in the story of her own family. Margaret Thompson sat quietly at her seat, her hands folded neatly on her lap, the soft hum of conversation surrounding her like a distant current she could not quite reach. The lights above glimmered off the polished crystal glasses on the tables, reflecting in her blue eyes as she scanned the room with an acute awareness that every gesture and whisper mattered. She observed Romy Carter from across the room, noting how every movement seemed choreographed, every smile calculated, every glance measured to assert dominance without raising a voice. Wade Thompson engaged politely with other guests, nodding and smiling, yet there was a tension in his shoulders, a subtle hesitance as if he sensed the undercurrent between his mother and wife but chose not to intervene. Margaret's eyes drifted to the decorations, the soft ivory linens, the bouquets of peonies and roses carefully arranged in vases that towered elegantly above the table, and she allowed herself to absorb the beauty of the evening while mentally cataloging each slight, each calculated act of exclusion, each moment that revealed Romy's careful orchestration of the event. She remembered the hours she had spent preparing for this evening in her own home, making sure her granddaughter's special day would be a memory of warmth and family, and now she contrasted that with the subtle coldness that permeated the air here. Margaret noticed how Romy engaged other guests, laughing lightly, adjusting the conversation in ways that highlighted her influence, steering attention away from Margaret without a single harsh word. And yet the underlying message of disrespect was unmistakable. The soft clinking of utensils and the faint murmur of polite conversation felt distant, almost surreal, as Margaret traced the way Romy's gestures seemed designed to establish hierarchy, positioning herself and subtly diminishing Margaret's presence. She caught the brief flicker of a glance from Wade, his expression conflicted, and she allowed herself a quiet acknowledgement of that small sign of awareness while maintaining her own composed exterior. Each course was served with precision, yet Margaret noticed how the seating arrangements, the flow of the evening, and even the choice of music contributed to a subtle marginalization of her presence. She observed how the young waitstaff moved seamlessly around the room, and each detail, from the folded napkins to the arrangement of the chairs, seemed to emphasize Romy's control of the environment. Margaret's breathing remained steady, her posture upright, as she mentally reviewed every interaction, every smile, every tilt of the head, and she began to see the larger pattern of deliberate control and exclusion. The ambient light shifted slightly as the evening progressed, the soft glow of the chandeliers casting long shadows across the floor, creating pockets of quiet and reflection, and Margaret found herself taking in each one, storing the information carefully, noting what could be used to understand the dynamics at play. She reflected on her decades of family history, the gatherings she had nurtured, the countless hours of preparation and thought, and she felt a calm recognition that despite the surface-level civility, she was being strategically edged out. Margaret's hand lightly touched the stem of her glass, grounding herself in the tactile sensation, and her mind wandered to subtle strategies, quiet observations, ways to navigate this event without confrontation, maintaining her dignity while absorbing every nuance of Romy's maneuvers. She allowed herself a small, controlled exhale, appreciating the contrast between the warmth of the floral arrangements and the cool undertone of the social currents around her, understanding that patience and observation were as much a display of power as any overt confrontation could be. In this quiet, internal assessment, Margaret Thompson felt a deepening clarity about the relationships around her, about the unspoken rules Romy imposed on the room, and about the necessity of maintaining her own composure, not as weakness, but as a conscious choice to retain authority, awareness, and the ability to act when the moment was right. The music swelled softly in the background, a gentle accompaniment to the undercurrent of tension, and Margaret allowed the scene to unfold in front of her with deliberate attention, absorbing the subtleties of body language, timing, and tone, cataloging the complex interplay between politeness and quiet manipulation, fully aware that each observation was a building block for the steps she would take in response to reclaim her rightful place, and ensure her voice and presence would be acknowledged in the family without ever descending into confrontation. Margaret Thompson shifted slightly in her seat, the soft fabric of her gown whispering against the polished marble floor as she surveyed the room once more, each glance carefully measured, each movement deliberate. She watched Romy Carter move between clusters of guests, her gestures fluid, her laughter light but carrying a precision that drew attention while subtly directing it away from Margaret herself. Wade Thompson remained engaged with the crowd, offering polite smiles and small talk, his eyes occasionally flicking toward his mother, a hint of unease in the lines around his mouth. Margaret allowed herself a slow inhale, noting the way the candlelight caught on the crystal chandeliers, scattering reflections across the walls and ceilings, mirroring the complexity of the interaction she observed. Each toast, each clink of a glass, seemed to underscore the delicate choreography Romy had orchestrated, and Margaret catalogued each nuance quietly in her mind, the smallest tilt of a head, the softest inflection in a voice, each detail building a map of subtle power plays. She noticed the way Romy positioned herself near relatives who had influence in the family, leaning slightly forward as she engaged them in conversation, drawing them into her orbit, while Margaret's presence was gently marginalized without any overt confrontation. The music in the background rose and fell with measured crescendos, its soft strings mingling with laughter and murmurs, creating a rhythm Margaret could trace, each note a marker of the evening's flow and its social currents. Margaret's eyes drifted to the floral centerpieces, peonies and white lilies arranged with elegance, their soft fragrance blending with the warmth of the room, and she allowed herself a quiet appreciation of the beauty around her, while simultaneously reading the room for intention and subtle cues. She reflected on the hour spent preparing for past family gatherings, the care with which she had ensured everyone felt included, and contrasted it with the current orchestrated distance, the way Romy had arranged the evening to highlight her own control while minimizing Margaret's role. Every gesture by Romy, every nod and carefully timed laugh, was noted in Margaret's mind, a mental ledger of social maneuvering. She observed Wade's interactions, his gentle deference, the subtle shifts in his expressions as he navigated the tension, and Margaret felt a quiet reassurance in his attentiveness, however slight. Her hands rested lightly on the table, fingertips brushing the smooth surface as she grounded herself in the tactile reality of the evening, maintaining composure, watching and learning, the subtle changes in the room, the positioning of chairs, the flow of conversation, even the timing of service from the staff, all contributed to an atmosphere of control and exclusion, and Margaret catalogued these with a calm awareness, understanding that patience and observation were as important as any direct action she could take. She allowed her gaze to sweep over the guests once more, noting small alignments, whispered exchanges, the quiet influence of Romy shaping interactions, and she mentally traced pathways of potential response, her mind quiet but sharply attentive. Margaret's posture remained upright, her expression composed, yet her mind was alive with awareness, a careful balance of observation and control, knowing that each subtle moment could inform future decisions and that the evening, though fraught with tension, was a stage upon which her quiet strength and measured response would be defined. Margaret Thompson allowed her eyes to drift toward the edges of the ballroom once again, taking in the details that would normally escape casual attention. The soft golden glow from the chandeliers highlighted the delicate folds of her gown and the polished surfaces of the tables, the silverware arranged with precise symmetry. She noticed the subtle exchanges of glances among the guests, the half-smiles, the brief nods, and how Romy Carter seemed to command these subtle acknowledgments without raising her voice, each movement calculated to maintain control of the room. Margaret's posture remained poised, her hands resting lightly on the table, fingertips barely grazing the smooth linen, while her mind catalogued each gesture, each subtle maneuver. She observed how Wade Thompson tried to bridge small gaps in conversation, attempting to maintain harmony while carefully avoiding confrontation, his manner gentle yet cautious, a delicate balance between loyalty to his wife and respect for his mother. Margaret allowed herself to recall past family events, small celebrations she had orchestrated, remembering the warmth and laughter that once filled similar spaces, now replaced with calculated interactions and measured civility. The gentle murmur of voices and the soft background of string instruments seemed distant as she focused on the choreography of the evening, seeing patterns emerge in the way Romy engaged certain relatives, drew attention toward herself, and subtly marginalized Margaret's presence. Every tilt of the head, every adjustment of a chair, every laugh that did not reach the eyes, became part of the evidence Margaret stored in her mind, each detail contributing to an understanding of the dynamics at play. She noticed how the floral arrangements, tall and carefully positioned, created partitions that further accentuated Romy's central position, and how even the placement of dessert trays and the flow of service from the staff supported the narrative Romy sought to maintain. Margaret's breathing remained steady, each exhale measured, a silent assertion of control over her own composure. She observed the way small groups formed, the quiet alliances, the indirect attention given to Romy's commentary, and she catalogued every nuance, understanding that observation was a quiet form of power, that patience could be more revealing than direct confrontation. Margaret's mind moved through strategies, possibilities, and contingencies, each carefully considered, each noting how her responses, measured and composed, could reclaim presence and authority without diminishing the elegance and decorum of the event. She allowed the room to continue its rhythm, absorbing conversations, smiles, and gestures, knowing that her awareness and attentiveness were as significant as any visible action. The gentle lighting shifted with the evening, casting long, soft shadows that reflected the complexity of the interactions around her, and Margaret felt the calm clarity of understanding settle over her, a quiet acknowledgement that despite the undercurrents of manipulation, she retained control over her perception, her attention, and ultimately, the dignity with which she would navigate the remainder of the night. Each passing moment became an opportunity to observe, to understand, and to plan, and she remained seated, an unwavering figure in the midst of subtle maneuvering, fully present, fully aware, and quietly in command of her own awareness as the evening unfolded. Margaret Thompson noticed a subtle shift in the energy around her as the evening progressed, the soft glow of the chandeliers casting delicate patterns on the polished floors that mirrored the intricate social dance unfolding before her. Guests moved in gentle clusters, engaging in polite conversation, laughter lightly sprinkled across the air. Yet Margaret could sense the undercurrents of intention behind the words and gestures. She observed Romy Carter from her seat, noting the strategic pauses in conversation, the careful positioning near key relatives, and the slight but deliberate gestures that guided attention toward herself while quietly minimizing Margaret's presence. Wade Thompson remained attentive to the rhythm of the evening, offering small smiles and polite nods, his attention oscillating between his mother and his wife, a quiet awareness present but not intrusive. Margaret allowed her eyes to scan the table arrangements, the silverware aligned perfectly, the floral arrangements placed to catch the eye and perhaps subtly reinforce Romy's influence over the room, and she catalogued each detail in her mind. The soft murmur of conversation, the gentle clinking of glass, the background hum of the string quartet, all seemed to contribute to a carefully crafted atmosphere where Margaret's presence was acknowledged politely, but kept at the periphery. She reflected on previous family events she had orchestrated, moments of warmth and inclusion she had nurtured over decades, and contrasted that with the calculated social choreography she now witnessed, understanding the subtlety of exclusion as an art. Each smile, each nod, each careful tilt of a head by Romy became evidence of an ongoing pattern of manipulation, and Margaret absorbed every nuance, noting how small gestures could carry immense weight in the perception of authority and control. Margaret's posture remained composed, her hands resting lightly on the table as her mind quietly traced the interactions, discerning the layers of subtle power and influence. She noticed the quiet gestures of Emily Thompson, her granddaughter, who offered small, discreet signs of support and acknowledgement, lending a faint warmth amid the measured coldness of the orchestrated evening. Margaret felt the calm clarity of observation settle over her, the knowledge that every moment she catalogued would inform her understanding of family dynamics and the path forward. The soft lighting shifted as the evening advanced, highlighting subtle expressions, fleeting glances, and the rhythmic flow of the room, all of which Margaret noted with precise attention. She remained poised, her presence unobtrusive yet fully aware, an anchor amidst the social currents, silently gathering insight, and understanding that patience, observation, and composed attention were her tools for maintaining dignity and influence, ensuring that despite the careful orchestration around her, she retained control over her own experience and perception of the unfolding events. Margaret Thompson felt the evening stretch on with a rhythm that was both familiar and subtly foreign, the soft laughter, the gentle clinking of glasses, and the distant hum of music providing a backdrop against which she observed every detail with heightened clarity. She noticed the way Romy Carter continued to navigate the space, her posture confident, movement smooth, each gesture reinforcing her control over interactions, each nod and tilt of the head shaping the flow of attention in the room. Wade Thompson remained near his mother when possible, offering small smiles, his presence a quiet acknowledgement of Margaret's steady composure, a buffer against the more calculated displays around them. Margaret's eyes swept over the room, noting the subtle positioning of family members, the slight lean of a shoulder, the careful spacing of chairs, and the way these small choices contributed to the social architecture Romy maintained with meticulous care. Margaret's mind catalogued each nuance, each micro-expression, understanding the unspoken hierarchy being reinforced without a single overt word. She observed the waitstaff moving gracefully between tables, delivering plates and drinks, and considered how even the rhythm of service contributed to the controlled environment, the timing of arrivals and departures, the gentle pauses in conversation, all part of the evening's choreography. Her attention returned to Romy as she engaged in a quiet conversation with Emily Thompson, Margaret's granddaughter. Noting the subtle inflection in Romy's voice and the controlled gestures, the way the words flowed smoothly yet carefully, almost as if rehearsed, while Margaret absorbed the full context of their interaction. The soft illumination from the chandeliers shifted slightly as the evening progressed, casting gentle shadows that mirrored the interplay of politeness and strategy in the room. And Margaret allowed herself a quiet appreciation of the space while remaining sharply aware of the currents of influence. Each observed glance, each carefully measured laugh, each slight nod became part of a mental ledger, a record of interactions that could later inform her understanding and guide her measured response. Margaret reflected on her own decades of experience hosting and nurturing family events, the care she had always taken to maintain warmth, inclusion, and dignity, and contrasted that with the precise orchestration she now witnessed. Recognizing patterns of exclusion and subtle manipulation, she permitted herself a small, deliberate exhale, feeling grounded and alert, her awareness encompassing both the physical room and the dynamics of those present. Every detail became a piece of evidence, every gesture a clue, and Margaret's internal cataloging continued, her composure unwavering, her posture dignified, and her mind active, quietly formulating insights and observations that would guide her in navigating the remaining hours of the evening with precision, grace, and unshakable poise. Margaret Thompson sat back slightly, allowing her gaze to trace the movement of guests across the ballroom, the soft rustle of fabric and quiet murmur of conversation forming a backdrop that seemed both ordinary and charged with subtle meaning. She noticed how Romy Carter navigated from table to table with a precision that was almost imperceptible, her gestures smooth, her posture upright, her smile carefully curated to invite attention, while subtly directing it away from Margaret. Wade Thompson remained close by, offering polite acknowledgments to family members while his eyes occasionally flickered toward his mother, registering her presence and composure without disturbing the social balance she maintained. Margaret observed the intricate choreography of the evening, the placement of chairs, the flow of service staff moving gracefully among tables, and the gentle timing of introductions and toasts, all elements contributing to the silent assertion of Romy's influence in the room. She allowed herself to appreciate the elegance of the decorations, the ivory linens, the tall vases of roses and peonies, and the warm glow of the chandeliers reflecting off polished surfaces, while mentally noting the ways in which these details subtly emphasized Romy's centrality and control. Margaret's posture remained poised, her hands lightly resting on the table as she catalogued each interaction, each smile and nod, each shift of attention, understanding the quiet power embedded in observation and patience. She noticed Emily Thompson offering small gestures of acknowledgement, subtle but significant, and Margaret welcomed these as the only threads of warmth and alignment in the carefully structured evening. The soft strains of music intertwined with the conversations, creating a rhythm that Margaret traced, noting the timing of pauses, the flow of dialogue, and the subtleties of body language, all contributing to her understanding of the social hierarchy in play. She reflected on her own experience hosting and nurturing family events, recalling decades of celebrations she had organized with care, warmth, and attention, and contrasted that with the controlled environment orchestrated by Romy. Each measured glance, each slight adjustment of a chair or tilt of the head, every moment of interaction became part of Margaret's internal ledger, a quiet record she maintained with diligence, noting intent and consequence with precision. She allowed her mind to consider strategies, responses that required patience, awareness, and the subtle exercise of influence without confrontation, understanding that her presence and composure alone could communicate strength. Margaret breathed slowly, grounding herself in the tactile sensations of the table and glass in front of her, the subtle warmth of the candlelight on her skin, maintaining composure as she cataloged the subtle power dynamics surrounding her. She noted the delicate balance between politeness and influence, the invisible threads of hierarchy Romy had woven throughout the room, and Margaret recognized that by maintaining calm, careful observation, and quiet attention, she retained agency and authority in her own right. The evening continued its measured pace, the lighting shifting to softer hues, shadows stretching gently across the polished floors, and Margaret remained attentive, poised, and fully aware, cataloging the intricate details that would inform her understanding and guide her subtle navigation of the remainder of the night, embodying quiet strength and the assurance that she would remain an unshakable presence amidst the carefully orchestrated social dynamics. Margaret Thompson felt a quiet resolve settle over her as the evening continued, the gentle hum of conversation and soft clinking of glasses serving as a distant rhythm to her focused observation. She watched Romy Carter move with practiced ease among the guests, her gestures precise, her posture elegant, each movement drawing subtle attention while maintaining a polished, controlled demeanor. Wade Thompson remained nearby, his expressions careful, his words measured, offering brief smiles and polite comments while allowing his mother the space to navigate the evening on her own terms. Margaret's eyes traced the flow of the room, noting the placement of tables, the gentle alignment of chairs, and the strategic positioning of relatives in ways that subtly reinforced Romy's influence over the social dynamics. She observed the quiet exchanges between guests, the soft tilts of heads, the fleeting glances that carried meaning beneath the surface of civility, and she cataloged each one with deliberate attention. The floral arrangements, with their tall vases and carefully chosen blooms, seemed to frame Romy as the center of the room, an unspoken statement that Margaret understood fully without confrontation. She allowed herself to appreciate the warmth of the candlelight, the soft reflections dancing across crystal glassware, the delicate balance of ambience and decor, while simultaneously registering the underlying tension that Romy orchestrated with subtle precision. Margaret's hands rested lightly on the table, her posture composed, her breathing steady, as she mentally traced patterns, recognized small alliances, and noted the undercurrents of attention and influence. Emily Thompson, her granddaughter, offered occasional small gestures of connection, a subtle reassurance that Margaret was not entirely isolated in her awareness, and these moments became small anchors in the otherwise carefully controlled environment. Margaret reflected on her years of experience in family gatherings, the countless celebrations she had orchestrated, the attentiveness and care she had invested, and contrasted them with the meticulous choreography she now observed, understanding the ways in which subtle influence could shape perception without overt action. She cataloged every smile, every nod, every slight gesture as evidence, noting the hierarchy being reinforced, the quiet assertion of dominance that required no loud declarations, the soft music, the shifting light, the movement of guests, all created a canvas upon which Margaret's awareness painted a clear picture of the social architecture, and she allowed herself a calm acknowledgement of the power she maintained through observation, patience, and poise. Each passing moment became another point of clarity, a silent note in her ledger of understanding, as Margaret remained seated, fully composed, fully attentive, and fully aware of the delicate interplay of relationships around her. She recognized that through her continued composure and careful attention, she retained agency, influence, and dignity, and that her presence alone, measured and deliberate, could assert a quiet authority that no overt gesture could replicate, ensuring that she would navigate the remainder of the evening with intelligence, grace, and unshakable poise. Margaret Thompson felt the evening drawing to its natural close, the soft light of the chandeliers dimming slightly as the last course was cleared and gentle murmurs of conversation softened into smaller, more intimate clusters. She remained seated, her posture composed, observing each detail with careful attention, noting the subtle shifts in body language, the fading energy in the room, and the ways in which Romy Carter adjusted her approach to maintain influence even as the event wound down. Wade Thompson lingered nearby, polite and attentive, offering small gestures of acknowledgement toward Margaret while maintaining his own balance within the family dynamic, his subtle presence reinforcing her quiet authority without intruding. Margaret allowed her gaze to sweep across the tables, noting the gentle interplay of light and shadow, the reflections in the crystal glassware, the way small smiles and nods were exchanged with careful timing, each a minor performance within the social structure of the evening. She recognized that every detail, every soft gesture, every strategic pause had contributed to the carefully maintained equilibrium, and she cataloged each observation with precise awareness, understanding the full spectrum of influence that had unfolded in her absence of overt confrontation. The floral arrangements, now slightly fading in the softening light, continued to frame the tables elegantly, while she noted the subtle ways Romy positioned herself near allies, ensuring her continued visibility and control. Margaret's hands rested lightly on the table as she reflected on the cumulative impact of the evening, her mind tracing the interactions, the subtle power plays, and the understated assertions of authority that had defined the night. Emily Thompson offered occasional small, discreet acknowledgments, a gentle thread of warmth and connection that reinforced Margaret's presence and reminded her of the quiet support that existed amidst the controlled social environment. Margaret allowed herself a small, steady exhale, appreciating the composure she had maintained throughout, the careful attention she had given to every nuance, every gesture, and every moment of subtle influence. She recognized the power inherent in observation, patience, and the maintenance of dignity, understanding that by remaining fully aware and composed, she had preserved her presence, authority, and insight into the family dynamics that had unfolded. The soft music continued to drift through the room as guests began to exchange farewells, and Margaret remained seated, noting each movement, each polite bow, each brief conversation, all part of the pattern she had quietly observed throughout the evening. Her calm, steady awareness became the lens through which she understood the entirety of the event, allowing her to process the intricacies of relationships, the orchestration of attention, and the subtle assertion of control. Margaret Thompson understood fully that her quiet observation, composed demeanor, and careful attention to detail had allowed her to navigate the complex social currents of the evening with intelligence, grace, and unshakable poise, ensuring that even in the absence of confrontation, she remained fully present, fully aware, and quietly authoritative as the night drew to a close.